In ancient days, when the people of Israel lived among wars, kings, and trials, a young man was born who would one day be remembered for his firm faith and unshakable courage. His name was Shadrach, although that was not the name he received at birth. His Hebrew name was Hananiah, which means God is merciful. From an early age, his life was marked by a destiny that would not be ordinary. Hananiah was born in Judah, in a land where the fear of God still lived in the hearts of many. He grew up in a family that taught him to obey the laws of the Lord, to pray, and to remain faithful no matter the circumstances. As a child, he showed a sharp mind, a calm attitude, and a strong character. He was not impulsive or rebellious. Instead, he listened, learned, and kept the teachings he received deep in his heart. But the world around him was changing. The kingdom of Judah was facing the threat of the powerful empire of Babylon. And one day, what seemed distant became real. King Nebuchadnezzar invaded Jerusalem, destroyed part of the city, and took many young men captive, including Hananiah. That moment marked the end of the life he had known. He was separated from his family, his land, and everything familiar to him. Yet he was not chosen by chance. The king's soldiers were looking for young men who were healthy, intelligent, and good in appearance, capable of serving in the palace. Hananiah met all those qualities. The journey to Babylon was long and full of uncertainty. Many cried, others were afraid, but Hananiah remained silent. Deep inside, something told him that God had not abandoned him. When they arrived in Babylon, everything was different. The customs, the language, the food, even the way of life. There, the young Hebrews were trained to serve the king. They were taught the language of the Chaldeans, their knowledge, and their way of thinking. They were also given new names as a way to erase their identity. It was then that Hananiah received the name Shadrach, a name that did not honor the God of Israel, but the gods of Babylon. Yet even though his name changed, his heart did not. Alongside him were 3 other Hebrew young men who would become very important in his life: Daniel, Mishael, and Azariah, who were also given new names. Among them a strong friendship was formed, built on faith and the desire to remain loyal to God. From the beginning, Shadrach faced difficult decisions. One of them was the king's food. It was rich and luxurious, but it did not follow God's laws. To eat, it meant to disobey what he had learned since childhood. It was Daniel who proposed the solution. He asked that they be allowed to eat only vegetables and drink water for a time. Shadrach and his friends accepted the challenge. They did not know what would happen, but they trusted God. Days passed, and to everyone's surprise, the 4 young men looked healthier than the others. This was not luck. It was a clear sign that God was with them. From that moment on, Shadrach began to stand out, not only because of his intelligence, but because of the way he lived. He was respectful, wise, and firm in his beliefs. He did not give in to pressure or fear. Over time, King Nebuchadnezzar began to notice these young men. Among all the wise men of Babylon, none compared to them. Their knowledge and their ability to solve problems were greater than the rest. So Shadrach rose to an important position in the kingdom. He was not just a servant. He became a counselor, someone trusted. But that privilege also brought risks. In Babylon, worshipping other gods was normal. Refusing to do so could bring serious consequences. Yet Shadrach never forgot who he was or whom he truly served. Even though he lived in a foreign land, his heart remained in God's hands. Every decision he made, every word he spoke, was guided by the faith he had learned since childhood. It is not known exactly how old he was at that time, but he was young. His life was just beginning, and he was already facing trials that many could not endure. As for his personal life, the Bible does not mention that Shadrach had a wife or children. This has led many to believe that he dedicated his entire life to service and faith, without forming a family. His story is not about descendants, but about faithfulness. But the most important moment was still ahead. The moment that would define his life would not be his intelligence or his position, but his faith in the face of danger. An event that would change everything and show the world, Gath, that his trust in God was not just words. One day King Nebuchadnezzar had an idea that would test his entire kingdom. He ordered a massive statue of gold to be built. It was tall, impressive, impossible to ignore. He commanded that everyone must bow down and worship it when they heard the music. The order was clear. Whoever did not obey would be thrown into a blazing furnace. For many, this was not a problem. Bowing down was easy. It was just an act. But for Shadrach it was. Not to bow meant to betray everything he believed. It meant to deny God. When the moment came, the music began to play. Thousands of people bowed down. The ground was filled with bodies in worship. But among them, 3 men remained standing. Shadrach, along with his friends, did not move. It was not pride or rebellion. It was faith. That simple yet powerful act did not go unnoticed. Some men, filled with envy, quickly went to accuse them before the king. And so, the calm that Shadrach had maintained for so long was about to be broken. The fire of the furnace did not only burn bodies, it tested hearts, and Shadrach was about to face it. The news reached the palace quickly. The accusers wasted no time. With carefully chosen words, they pointed at Shadrach and his companions as rebels. They said that, despite having received honor from the king, they refused to obey his command. King Nebuchadnezzar was filled with anger when he heard this. He could not believe that those young men, whom he had elevated, were now disobeying him in front of everyone. He ordered that they be brought immediately before him. The atmosphere in the room was heavy. Guards stood firm, counselors watched closely, and the king's face was hardened. Shadrach and his friends were brought before him, yet they showed no fear. Their faces were calm, as if they knew something the others did not understand. The king spoke with a strong voice. He reminded them of the order. He gave them another chance. He told them that if they bowed down now, everything would be forgiven. But if they refused, they would be thrown into the blazing furnace. No one would be able to save them. The room fell silent. Then Shadrach answered, not with arrogance, but with a confidence that surprised everyone. He said they did not need to defend themselves, that their God was able to deliver them from the fire, and even if he did not, they would not bow down to the statue. That answer was not only brave, it was firm. It did not depend on the outcome. It was not based on fear or convenience. It was true faith. The king's face changed. His anger grew even stronger. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. The fire roared with power, as if waiting to consume anyone who came near. The strongest soldiers in the army were commanded to tie up Shadrach and his companions. They bound them with their clothes still on, without removing anything. Everything was meant to burn. The heat was so intense that even getting close was dangerous. But the order had to be carried out. When the soldiers brought the 3 men toward the furnace, something unexpected happened. The flames were so fierce that the very soldiers who pushed them in died instantly, consumed by the fire. But Shadrach and his friends fell into the furnace. The fire surrounded them. The moment was decisive. To anyone watching from outside, it was the end. No one could survive that heat. No one could come out alive. The king rose from his throne, expecting to see their bodies being consumed. But what he saw left him speechless. Inside the fire, there were not 3 men, there were 4. Shadrach and his friends were not screaming. They were not trying to escape. They were walking inside the fire as if it did not touch them. The ropes that bound them were gone. Their bodies were unharmed. And with them, there was another man, one who had not been thrown into the furnace. His appearance was different. He shone. His presence filled the place with something no one could explain. The king moved closer, his eyes wide with astonishment. He asked his counselors if they had not thrown 3 men into the fire. They confirmed it. Then the king said that he saw 4, and that the 4th looked like a divine being. The furnace was still burning. The fire was still strong. But inside it, there was peace. Shadrach was not alone. That moment changed everything, not only for them, but for everyone who was watching. The king, who had once been filled with anger, was now filled with amazement. He came as close as he could and called for the 3 men to come out. With authority, but also with respect, he asked them to come out of the furnace. Shadrach and his friends walked out. When they came out, everyone there gathered around them. They wanted to see up close what seemed impossible, but it was real. The fire had no power over them. Their hair was not burned. Their clothes were untouched. There was not even the smell of smoke on them. It was as if the fire had never touched them. Silence filled the place. No one could deny what had happened. Then the king spoke, but this time his words were not of threat, but of recognition. He declared that the God of Shadrach was powerful, that he had sent someone to save them, and that no one should speak against that God. He also ordered that anyone who did so would be punished. What began as an act of defiance ended as a demonstration of divine power. Shadrach did not only survive the fire, he came out stronger. After that event, the king elevated Shadrach and his companions even more. Their position in the kingdom grew. But more important than that, their testimony became known throughout all Babylon. The story of the furnace was not forgotten. It became a living proof that faith can endure even the hardest trials. Shadrach did not need to fight with weapons or convince with long speeches. His decision to stand firm was enough. From that moment on, his life took a new direction. He was no longer just a wise young man. He was a man whose faith had been tested and had come out victorious. But life does not end after a great trial. There were still years to live, decisions to make, and a path to walk in a land that was not his own. Shadrach continued serving in the kingdom, with wisdom, with respect, and with the same faith that had brought him that far. He did not seek recognition. He did not seek power. He simply remained faithful, although not much is said about what happened afterward in detail. It is clear that his influence continued. His example left a mark on those around him. It is not known exactly how many years he lived or how he died. The Bible remains silent on that part. But what is known is that his story does not depend on how it ended, but on what he did while he lived. Shadrach is remembered not for riches or family, but for his courage, for standing firm when everyone else bowed, for trusting when everything seemed lost, and above all, for walking in the midst of fire without losing his faith. The furnace burned, but his heart remained untouched. After that day in the furnace, the life of Shadrach changed forever. He was no longer just one of the wise young men of the kingdom. His name began to be known as that of a man who had faced the fire and come out unharmed. In Babylon, stories were passed from mouth to mouth, and this one was no exception. Many spoke about what had happened. Some with amazement, others with doubt. But no one could deny what their own eyes had seen. Shadrach did not become proud. He did not seek fame or recognition. He continued living the same way, serving with respect, speaking with wisdom, and keeping his faith quiet but firm. His relationship with God grew even stronger. The fire had not only tested his body, it had strengthened his spirit. Now he knew, without any doubt, that he was not alone. In the palace, his influence grew. He was consulted in important decisions. His way of thinking was clear. He was not driven by pressure or personal interests. He sought what was right, even when it was not the easiest path. The years began to pass. King Nebuchadnezzar continued to rule for a time. During that period, the kingdom of Babylon reached great power, but it was also a time of pride for the king. And even though he had seen the power of Shadrach's God, he often returned to trusting in himself more than anything else. Shadrach observed all of this in silence. He did not force his faith on others. He did not argue without reason, but he did not hide it either. He lived in a way that allowed his actions to speak for him. As for his personal life, there are no clear records that he formed a family. There is no mention of a wife or children. This has led many to believe that his life was completely devoted to service and faith. While others sought to build homes, Shadrach seemed to have a different purpose. His legacy, Kairos, would not be a lineage, but an example. Time brought changes. New kings began to rise. Empires began to shift. Babylon, which once seemed eternal, started to show signs of weakness. Through all these changes, Shadrach remained firm. No matter who ruled, his faith did not change. He was a constant man in a world that never stopped changing. Many young men who worked in the palace began to observe him. They saw something different in him. He was not like the others. He was not driven by ambition or fear. Some approached him with questions. They wanted to understand why he lived the way he did. Shadrach did not give long speeches. He spoke simply. He said that everything came from his trust in God. For him, it was not complicated. It was a daily decision. Over time, his story began to spread beyond the palace. Even among foreigners, his name became known. The man who did not bow, the man who walked in the fire. But Shadrach did not live in the past. He did not hold on, key to that moment. Each day was a new opportunity to remain faithful. There were difficult moments after the furnace. Not everything was peaceful. Living in a foreign land always brought challenges. There were laws, customs, and decisions that often did not align with his faith. But he never turned back. He never chose the easy path, if that path meant betraying what he believed. As he grew older, his character became even stronger, not through hardness, but through conviction. He was a man at peace. He did not need to prove anything. His life already spoke for itself. In the middle of an empire full of power, wealth, and pride, Shadrach was a reminder of something different, of humility, of faithfulness, of a faith that does not depend on circumstances. Some say he witnessed the fall of Babylon. Others believe he died before that moment. There is no certainty. What is clear is that he lived long enough to see the impact of his decisions. The fire did not consume him, and neither did power. His heart remained the same. Despite the changes, the years, and the trials, he never stopped being that young man who chose not to bow. That was his greatest achievement, not surviving the fire, but remaining faithful until the end. His story is not filled with words. It is filled with decisions. Decisions that shaped his life and the lives of many others. And even though not all the details of his final years are known, his example still lives on. Because there are stories that do not need a detailed ending to be remembered. They only need truth. And Shadrach lived in that truth every single day of his life. The years moved forward with steady steps, and the life of Shadrach became a reflection of consistency. There were no great announcements about his days, no stories filled with surprising events like the one in the furnace. Yet in that calm, there was something powerful. Shadrach remained the same. He did not change his way of thinking or the way he lived. Even after witnessing such a great miracle, he did not become careless or overconfident. He knew that each day carried its own test. In Babylon, life continued to be filled with idolatry. Statues, rituals, and traditions were part of daily life. But Shadrach did not take part in them. His faith was not something he showed only in great moments. It was a constant way of living. This was not always easy. There was pressure. There were watchful eyes. There were those who had not forgotten that he had once defied the king. Some respected him, others watched him, waiting for him. to fail. But that moment never came. Shadrach did not seek conflict, but he did not avoid the truth either. If he had to choose between obeying men or obeying God, his decision had already been made long ago. As time passed, his role within the kingdom became more stable. It is not known exactly what position he held, but it is clear that he carried responsibility. His wisdom and the way he lived made him trustworthy. He was not someone who spoke often, but when he did, his words carried weight. Many young leaders began to see him as an example, not only because of what he had lived through, but because of how he lived after it. Because standing firm in one moment is difficult, but standing firm for an entire life is even harder. Shadrach understood this. His faith did not depend on the miracle he had experienced. He did not need something extraordinary to happen again in order to believe. He had already decided in his heart whom he would serve. As for his personal life, the silence remains. There are no accounts of family, children, or descendants. And although for many this might seem like an absence, in his case it was not. Shadrach left a different kind of legacy. His life was his message, and that message was clear. Faithfulness does not depend on circumstances. It does not depend on place. It does not depend on the moment. It depends on a decision. Over the years, empires began to change. Babylon, once powerful and impressive, began to lose its strength. New kings, new laws, and new ways of ruling began to appear. For many, these changes brought fear, but not for Shadrach. His trust was not in a human kingdom. It was in something greater. As he grew older, his body was no longer the same. His steps became slower, his voice softer, but his faith remained just as strong. The new generations saw him as a wise man. Some had not witnessed the event of the furnace, but they had heard the story. And when they looked at him, they understood that it was not just a story, it was real. The man standing before them was proof of it. Many times, young people came to him to listen to his advice. They wanted to know how to remain firm in a world that constantly pulled them in another direction. Shadrach did not give complicated answers. He said that everything begins in the heart, that the decision to be faithful is not made in the middle of the trial. It is made before. It is made when no one is watching. It is made in the small things, because when the difficult moment comes, there is no time left to decide. You simply act according to what has already been chosen. That teaching stayed with many. His life became a quiet guide. He did not need to impose himself. He did not need to convince anyone. His example spoke louder than any words. And so, without great announcements or recognition, Shadrach continued on his path, a path of constant faith, a path of firm decisions, a path that did not depend on applause or fear, only on conviction. And even as the world around him changed again and again, he remained the same, steady, at peace, certain of what he believed. That was his true victory, not coming out of the fire, but living after it without changing. Many can have a moment of courage, but few can sustain that courage for a lifetime. Shadrach did, and in that silence full of meaning, his story continued to be written, not with ink, but with every daily decision, until finally the time came when his story on this earth was nearing its end. Time does not stop for anyone. And just as the years brought trials and moments of victory into the life of Shadrach, they also brought the moment when his strength slowly began to fade. He was no longer the young man who had been taken captive to Babylon, nor was he the strong man who walked through the fire without fear. Now he was an old man, with a face marked by time and eyes filled with wisdom. His hands, which had once been bound before the furnace, now rested in peace. His steps were slow, yet steady. And even though his body showed weakness, his spirit remained unbroken. Shadrach had lived a different kind of life. There are no exact records of his age. The Bible does not say how many years he lived, nor does it give details about his death. But what can be understood is that he reached an old age, having witnessed great changes in the world around him. He had seen the power of Babylon. He had witnessed the pride of kings. He had survived the fire, and above all, he had remained faithful. In his final days, there were no riches that defined him. There was no large family surrounding him. There were no children to carry his name. But there was something greater. There was a legacy that could not be touched, but could be felt. Those who knew him understood who he was, not because of titles, not because of exaggerated stories, but because of his life. In those final days, it is easy to imagine him in silence, remembering everything he had lived through, from his youth in Judah to his life in Babylon, from the moment his name was changed to the day he chose not to bow. Every moment had meaning. Every decision had shaped his path. Shadrach was not perfect. He was human. At some point he felt fear. He felt doubt, like anyone else. But he chose to trust, even when it was not easy. And that decision stayed with him until the end. There is no totality account of a tragic death. There is no dramatic scene. Everything suggests that his end was peaceful, like someone who has fulfilled his purpose, like someone who has no unfinished business, like someone who knows he did what was right. His death was not the most important event of his life. What mattered was how he lived, because many live long lives, but few leave a mark. Shadrach left a deep mark, not on buildings, not on riches, but on hearts. His story was told again and again. Generations later, his name was still remembered, not because he was a powerful man, but because he was a faithful one. The fiery furnace became a symbol of trial, a symbol of faith, a symbol that there are moments in life when everything seems lost, and yet it is still possible to stand firm. Shadrach taught something that cannot be learned from books, that faith is not just believing when everything is going well. It is standing firm when everything is against you. It is refusing to bow when everyone else does. It is trusting even when the outcome is uncertain. That was his greatest lesson. And even though his life ended in silence, his story did not. It lives on. In every person who chooses to do what is right, in every moment when someone decides to stand firm, in every trial where faith is tested. Shadrach did not need to write books. He did not need to raise his voice to be heard. His life spoke for him, and it still does. Because there are stories that do not fade with time. Stories that continue to inspire. Stories that continue to give strength. The story of Shadrach is one of them. A young man taken far from his land. A man who faced the fire. A heart that never gave up. And a legacy that remains. Thus ends his journey on this earth. But his example continues. Firm, like that day before the statue, when everyone bowed, and he chose to stand. If this message has touched your heart, you are invited to join this family of faith. Subscribe to this channel and join us each week to continue learning from the stories and teachings God has for us. Turn on the notification bell so you do not miss any video. Thank you for being here, and may God bless your life.